Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
What's your creepiest non-paranormal story? I work an overnight shift as a security guard, and aside from myself, another guard and some cleaners, the building is empty. Once the cleaners leave around 3:30 a.m., I normally try to go around and lock up any offices and rooms that need to be closed before any employees arrive before the lights shut off at 4:30. One night I got caught up with some other things, and by the time I got around to doing this, the lights were off, and since it was the middle of winter, there was no sign of sunlight saving me from the dark until I left at 7. So, I rushed around and closed all the doors as quickly as I could so I could get back to safety. I made my way to the second floor, but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the outline of a person on the other end of the floor with their arms positioned as if they were holding a large gun. I panicked and crouched behind a cubicle, but I kept looking to see where they'd go. No one had access to the building for several more hours, and if an employee happened to have come in that early, the other guard would have radioed me before something like this happened. The figure never moved from its spot, so I decided to creep closer and look around in case there was anyone else. I was pretty certain I was going to have a heart attack, because all I have at my disposal is a flashlight keychain, a walkie-talkie, and some keys, and this person might possibly have a gun. I managed to make it to a spot where the moonlight shining through the window illuminated the figure enough for me to at least make out some features. They wore a baseball hat, had long shaggy hair. They were in fact holding a gun, and they were easily 6 feet tall, but they still hadn't moved. I moved a little closer and noticed that the light reflected off of the figure in an odd way. I gathered the nerve to fish out my flashlight, and while still hiding behind another cubicle, I flashed the light on their face and finally caught a glimpse of the intruder. I was startled. This mysterious, gun-wielding intruder was actually a life-size cardboard cutout of Chewbacca. I legitimately spent 20 minutes stalking and building up the courage to confront a giant piece of cardboard.
A couple of months ago, my husband and I were road tripping across the U.S. At 3 a.m., we stopped at a rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska. By the middle of nowhere, I mean the middle of nowhere. The gas station was the only building in the area, and it was surrounded by empty fields. It was maybe 2 miles off the interstate. At 3 a.m., it was pitch black outside, and the lights at the gas station were the only thing that illuminated the area. Since the gas station was closed, we were the only people there. My husband filled up the Jeep, and we spent a few minutes rummaging through our bags because I couldn't find my purse. Turned out that I had left it in a relative's car in Chicago. Oops. After a while, an SUV pulled up right next to us. The driver was a white man in his late 20s or early 30s. At that point, I was sitting in the passenger seat and my husband was about to get into the driver's seat. The man approached my husband and said, "I lost my iPhone here. Have you seen it?" Suddenly, a sense of dread filled the pit of my stomach as I noticed that he already had a phone. A flip phone on his hip. I studied his face. While he looked unassuming, there was something off about him. Something sinister. "I must have left it in that field over there," he said. The field was pitch black. "Can you help me look for it?" My husband already had his iPhone out with the flashlight on. He's such a good Samaritan. He started to follow the man. I whipped out my phone and texted him, "Leave." My husband immediately saw the text and looked at me. I must have looked terrified because he ran, jumped into the car, and we booked it out of there. As we were leaving, I looked back and saw the man get into his car. We drove for about 20 miles on the interstate to a rest stop and slept there. After a brief time, my husband woke me up and told me to look through the passenger side window. The man had pulled up right next to us. There were some empty parking spaces at the rest stop, and he still parked next to us. The creepy part is that we were parked at the very end of the rest stop, and the spot next to us wasn't a parking space. We had our seats down to help us sleep, so he probably didn't see us in our Jeep. We quietly watched him get out of his car, look over our Jeep, and walk into the building, probably looking for us. As soon as he entered the building, we snapped our seats back up and hauled out of there. We drove for about 50 miles and found a hotel about 6 miles north of the interstate. We never saw him again.
I live in a rural area mountains, and woods around the premises. Anyways, I used to smoke outside on this slab concrete type thing on the side of the house. I was standing under a dim outdoor porch light, which lit about 20 feet around the area, so not extremely far. It was late at night, just me and my baby home, but my baby was sleeping. Not even halfway into my cigarette, I heard a deep growling noise, and it slowly got closer and louder as it did. When I first heard it, my reaction was to freeze. I didn't want to make eye contact with anything, so I don't even know how close it got. I just know it wasn't in front of me, but next to me. How close, I don't know. I didn't want to make a slow, sudden movement either, so I flicked my cig into the distance and jumped into the house, slammed, and locked the door. I made a plan that I'd tip over this large wooden cabinet in front of the door if something tried getting in. Waiting a few minutes in case whatever was tried busting through, then looked out the windows around the residence and didn't see anything. Assumed it was a bear. Another time, same residence. They heard numerous slams on the back door slowly creeping at the door, and they tried looking outside without being obvious, though the lights were off back there. But then I heard some thuds on the roof above me. I called the police. They came out within 10 or so minutes. They searched the area and said they didn't see anything suspicious, and it could have been a bear. So yes, but it doesn't explain the roof thuds.
I was at home alone, about 18 years old at the time. I had seriously bad agoraphobia at the time. I would keep all my blinds shut and everything locked up tight. I also had a tendency to avoid answering the door if someone knocked. It was mid-afternoon, and a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and so was instantly on guard. I decided not to answer and ignored it, but they kept knocking. It was giving me really bad anxiety. Then they started trying to open the door, just turning the doorknob as it was locked. This went on for about 20 minutes, then still knocking and trying to get in, so I finally answered the door. I kept the screen door locked though. There was a very disheveled, homeless-looking man there. Big scraggly beard, long naughty, wild hair. Dirty clothes. He asked if he could come in and stare at me. I said no sorry and shut the door. Then he started yelling out, pretty girl, come back, let me in, just let me look at you." I continued knocking and trying to get in. I had no phone on me at the time. I couldn't call the police. I was terrified. Eventually my boyfriend came home and found him standing on our porch. He asked my boyfriend if he could come inside and look at the pretty girl. My boyfriend told him to go away, or he would call the police, but he still wouldn't leave. The boyfriend called the police, and they came and took him away and talked to him. Police came back and told us he was actually our neighbor whose brother had passed away recently, and he had gone completely off the rails and had been binge drinking every day and not leaving his flat. We didn't recognize him because he was so messy and dirty looking, like a wild man.
When I was around 13, my single father worked nights, and because of this, I was in charge of babysitting my 10-year-old sister. I was up at 3 a.m. on a school night in the living room watching TV. This is around the time I discovered the Girls Gone Wild commercials, when I hear a car pull in my driveway. Thinking it was my father, I did what any sensible child would do, and I turned off the TV and like a bolt of lightning ran to my room. As I waited pretending to be sleeping, I noticed that the vehicle never turned off, and so I mustered up some courage and peeked out my bedroom window. Outside, there was a truck I didn't recognize just sitting in the driveway with its headlights on. I heard the front doorknob jingle, and for whatever reason I grabbed a metal pole, ran into my sister's room, locked the door, and started hitting it, making it sound like a house alarm. I did this for what felt like an eternity while my sister kept watch and saw two men get in the truck and drive off. They could have been lost, they could have been looking to rob us. Who knows, but I never told my father, and I never saw anything like that again. When I was in college, I was stopped at a gas station putting air in my tires, and this man came over and started talking to me. It started off fine. It seemed he was just friendly and without much social finesse. But then he continued to get closer to me and lean on my car. It is exceedingly difficult to explain, but I very much felt like I was in danger. There was no tangible way I could get into my car without trapping myself, and it just really seemed like he was intent on sticking around. My keys were also in car NB, because I was a 19-year-old Midwestern girl who still trusted the world. He also kept glancing toward the gas pumps, which I felt was a sign he was waiting for me to be alone. I know all the comments to this post will be, "You should have..." but I felt very trapped by the situation. About 5 or 6 minutes into this, I locked eyes with a different guy, much older, across the parking lot. I tried to convey something is wrong as hard as possible, and he quickly walked inside the gas station. I felt like he was trying to avoid seeing something unpleasant, and I was going to end up alone. A minute later, the older guy comes out of the gas station with a few sodas and walks directly out to me and says something like, "Good thing you stopped. Your mom has been hinting about being thirsty for the last half hour. I got you a soda too while I was in. Now, do you know how to get to some town name? Or do you want to follow?" I replied that I had better follow because you know how I am with directions. So this accomplished 2 things. He gave me an out to the situation and let the creepy guy know that someone was watching. So I followed him for about 3 miles out of town, at which point the guy just kind of waved like, "You're good," and I turned and went back to my dorm. I never got a chance to thank him in person, so every time I tell this story, I have to say a big thank you to anyone who has ever done anything like this. I've gotten 2 opportunities to step in and do something similar. I wish I could tell that guy that I will now always get involved when someone looks like they are in trouble, because if I'm wrong, well then I look crazy / can be embarrassed. But if I'm right, I can basically save someone. My brother was selling some of his old laptop stuff on Craigslist. He got an email from a middle-aged woman inquiring about the laptop. They eventually agreed on a price, and she asked him to meet her behind a nearby Farm Fresh. A neighborhood was behind the building. They were only separated by a chain-link fence. My brother got slightly suspicious, but not enough to back out of the deal. When it was time to meet up, my brother didn't park behind the Farm Fresh, but in the neighborhood with a good 50 yards between him and the fence. There was only one car parked behind the building, but the windows were too tinted to see from there. While still in the car, he texted her that he was at the discussed location. She texted that she couldn't see him, so he said that he was right around the side of the store and to get out and meet him. Then, all the car doors opened and 5 thuggish teenagers came out, one of which was carrying a baseball bat, and walked to where my brother said he was. No woman with them at all. A minute later, the same woman texted back saying that she still couldn't find him. Needless to say, the deal was off. 9th grade, my friends and I left campus for lunch and were walking through a neighborhood. My friend noticed up ahead on the other side of the street, some guy in a pickup truck was talking to a little girl right outside his front door with the front door open. He said something wasn't right, and I thought it must just be her father. Anyway, my friend walks up to him, my friends and me following, and asks if there's a problem. The older guy said no, leave him and his granddaughter alone. My friend asked her if that's her grandfather, and she said no. When he asked her if she knew him, she said no. That's when my friend John stepped in between them and started talking to him, threatening to kick his ass. My friend called the police. Police came. It got the neighbors' attention. Some guys across the street came out with baseball bats and chains when they saw what was going on. The police had to go and keep them from intervening, that the police officers were taking care of it. The girl's mom came outside and was crying and screaming, which is what got the neighbors' attention besides the sirens. We had to write down a report for the officers, give our contact information, though they never contacted us. If we didn't decide to walk to lunch that day, this little girl could have been kidnapped and killed. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. The next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from the main roads, and at the weekend, I knew our roads would remain unplowed for quite some time. I went to my outback deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries when I noticed footprints leading to my door, then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side and thought that one of their more delinquent kids played a joke as my sledding tube on the railing was popping. I decided I'd wait till later as it was early to call their parents. I went on Facebook, and after scrolling for a bit, I noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posting, "Did someone knock on me or something at my back door?" We immediately called her and told her I had an idea. I called the first house at the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, they were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end, and they told me there was none there. Then I got a call from my next-door neighbor. She called the woman that lives next to the end house. She said that there were footprints that led to her door, but no one led away. We have already called the police on this point, but now we called them back and said that it's an emergency now, They told us the roads are still all unplowed, and they can't send a plow truck to clear the way as they are a privately owned company. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands across the road from her texted her to say he was coming over to invite her over. He came, and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all exits. Nothing came out. Around 7 p.m., a plow truck came, as well as 3 police cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They found nothing. She begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the police officers went into the basement again. This time, only one came up. He took her to the side room, and we could hear hysterical crying. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man screaming and kicking came out in cuffs and was led away. In his little camp out, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away. In the room next to hers, she stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone. She sold the house next summer. He turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The police officers told us that they felt like he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate and drove off into his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck in our unplowed roads. We were all called as witnesses in the case, and he took some electronics from her basement. Couldn't get him on that since he never left with the stuff. It was about 4 months of court. And that is why you always make sure you lock your doors. Work second shift, get off at midnight, and at the time live with my family. My mom worked normal person hours, and my dad was a truck driver and got up at like 3 a.m. I got off work and at the door saw some smudges. Didn't think anything of it. When we went inside, everyone was asleep. I vegged a bit and decided to take a shower. Got out and heard commotion upstairs. Went up and everyone was awake, and there were police officers and an ambulance. The police officers were focused on our garage. Apparently my dad got up for work and let the dog out. That's when he saw greasy footprints that lead to my sister's bedroom window. Curtains were closed, and away. He followed the footprints to their origin in the garage. There's a knocked-over can of grease, and laying on some boxes was a body. My dad woke my mom up and made sure my sister wasn't dead or replaced by the big bad wolf. The police officers came, and the body woke up. He was just a super drunk man who had left a party on campus nearby, but didn't have a DD. So he walked, but because he was drunk, got lost. The garage door was left open, Dad, so he went in there. He knocked over the grease. My sister's light was on, so he went to see if he could get help. My heavy sleeper sister had passed out while watching TV and heard nothing. He went back to the garage and decided to sleep. My parents didn't press charges, and the police officers gave him a lift back home. When I was about 12, a bunch of us decided to go ghost hunting in an abandoned tuberculosis sanitarium. We waited until about midnight and sneaked in. The place was creepy and silent with dozens of those old wooden high-backed wheelchairs just scattered around. This was about 1962. We were just getting ready to go up some stairs when one of these wheelchairs came bouncing and crashing down them. We ran as fast as we could out of there and never went back. Well, for more than 10 years, we have known this story as a ghost story. Then, when I was about 24, I was out on a first date with this guy, and the conversation turned into spooky things we had encountered. I was getting ready to tell him about our ghost story and asked, "Do you remember that old Board of Health building that used to be on the outskirts of town?" He said, "Boy, do I." Me and some friends scared some kids there one night by throwing a wheelchair down some stairs. You should have seen those brats freak out and run. I babysit my cousin 2 kids pretty much every other Friday night, so he and his wife can have some time alone and out of the house. Their kids are 2 and 6 months, so they have video monitors in each of their rooms, and I pretty much watch the monitors and read or watch TV. Roughly a month ago, I heard talking coming out of one of the monitors. It was a man's voice, and he kept saying over and over again, "It's okay. Go back to sleep. I'm here," and I could see a figure standing over the crib in the 6-month-old's room. I freaked out thinking someone had broken it. They had a break around Christmas time, and the guy was never caught. I called the police and my cousin and crept upstairs with a knife to protect myself and the babies. No one was upstairs and both kids were sound asleep. Needless to say, I was thoroughly freaked out until the police and my cousin came out. It didn't help that they lived in an older home, and everything creaked. Fast forward to last week, the exact same thing happened to my cousin during the day while the kids were napping. But since it was daytime, the video monitor gave off a better picture of the room. Apparently, the one monitor in the 6-month-old's room switches over to the neighbor's monitor every once in a while. The voice I heard was that of his next-door neighbor, soothing their crying baby who was around the same age. I was working as a security officer at a courthouse in Florida on the 3P, 11P shift one Saturday night, sitting at my desk watching something or other on Netflix, when I heard a knock at the main entrance. Because of the way the security booth is set up, I can't actually see the front door without leaving the booth, so I get up to have a look. Nothing. Not a soul to be seen on the entire block. That's weird, I thought to myself. I returned to the desk and my movie, and about 15 minutes later I heard that knock again. I get up again and walk to the door, and again, nothing. Now, this is an old, cavernous marble and brass-plated lobby with really weird acoustics, so it occurs to me that this could be my partner is with me. I call him on the radio and ask where he is, and he says he's up on the 7th floor. Our radios are older model Nextel Direct Connect units, and they make a very loud and somewhat obnoxious chirp whenever they receive a call, and since I didn't hear it echoing from anywhere when I called, I knew my partner wasn't the source of the knock. Just then I heard the knock again. Again, I left the desk and went to the door, and still there's nothing there. Now, at this point I was starting to get a little bit creeped out. I'm not a believer in paranormal phenomenon or spiritual mumbo-jumbo, but even I had to admit that some weird stuff was afoot. I called my partner again and asked him to come downstairs, thinking that maybe between the two of us we could catch who or whatever was making this noise. He arrives just in time to hear that knock happen again, and this time he goes to have a look, and like the previous times, there's no one there. I explained that I've been hearing the same knock every few minutes for almost an hour now, and each time, there's nobody there. We decide that we'll each take one side of the entrance and watch to see what happens if the knock happens again. We take our positions and wait, and wait, and wait. 30 minutes later, we hear it again, knock, knock, knock. This time we were there, we were watching, and still, we couldn't see anyone. At this point, I'm starting to get a little pissed. This is usually an incredibly quiet shift, and whatever this is, it's weird with my routine. So, I open the front door and step outside just in time to hear knock, 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 from less than 5 feet away. I look down and see the biggest crab I've ever seen outside of a National Geographic special. Its body was roughly 12 inches across, and its claws were about half a foot long. And it was just sitting there, staring at its own reflection with its claws raised in what I can only assume was some kind of territorial or mating display. After a moment, it adjusted its stance slightly and extended a claw towards the glass. Knock, knock, knock. Finding myself at a bit of a loss, I said the first thing that popped into my head, "I'm sorry, but the courthouse is closed." And without any hesitation, that crab scuttled off into the night, never to be seen again. That's not the weirdest thing that ever happened on that shift, but it was probably the creepiest. This was probably 10 years ago. I was around 13 years old. I was at my house with my brother, around 11 years old, and our 2 friends/neighbors who were brothers and the same age as us. Both our parents and their parents had gone out together for the evening. Our house has large, double front doors. The second of the 2 doors, which is hardly used, has the locking mechanism where you have to unlatch it along the bottom of the door frame to open it. The main door is your standard front door. Anyway, we were playing video games in the basement when I decided to let our dog out. I went upstairs, unlocked the main door, let her out, shut the door, and locked it. I went back downstairs, and we continued to play whatever it was we were playing. I totally lost track of time, and my friend, whom I'll call Steve, noticed that our dog was sitting next to the couch we were on. I was confused, thinking perhaps our parents had just returned, as I hadn't gone and let her in. I went upstairs, calling for my parents, to which there was no response, and noticed both of the front doors were wide open. So not only had the main one been unlocked and opened, but the latch on the second had been undone, and that door had also been opened. I was terrified. I slammed both doors shut and locked them, grabbed the home phone, sprinted downstairs, and let the others know about the doors. We hunkered up in a spare bedroom, called our parents, and then immediately left wherever they were to head home. Nothing ever came of it. To this day, I still have no way of explaining it, but it was terrifying.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.